So thank you and good evening, everyone. Let me just see who's here. So Vajrapriya is here. He's the current International Order Convener along with Arya Jaya. Just also in terms of you were just mentioning that course arriving and those people, I also just wanted to say one of the stories I instantly remembered when I met Ojo Gita. Is Ojo Gita here tonight? No. One of the Indian Dharmacharanis. I didn't know she was coming, and when she said hello, I was straight away back in a market in Jaipur, Rajasthan, in 2006, where I was trying to buy my mum a little wooden elephant, and she was like, "You're going to need my help for this." So I stood to one side and she did the negotiation for me. Anyway, I saw her and just suddenly remembered being there. Anyway, that was a long time ago. Yes, so we've been here. When I say the we, so we're, the configuration that I've been part of, the Pilgrims Week, we've been here for a week, having, as you said, a very relaxed program, I must say. There's really something in there, just having such a relaxed program with just very small amounts of very, very fine Dharma input from your talk 5 days ago now, I think, going forth from, and this is Kema Bandhu, if you can't see him at the back. You talked about your moving from various false refuges and how you could see the uncompromising way, in my view, in which you sort of saw through things. And then you talked about the goal and all the different ways in which we can think about the goal based on Bante's extraordinary, explication in the Three Jewels, and also being a bit like the goal itself and the atmosphere of the thin place. So, it's been a very good thing to exemplify being with people on the team, including Shanti Chara here. We all take on responsibility and are willing to do that, and just exemplifying having an incredibly sort of, relaxed week. So we've even had some of our team meetings in a spare bedroom, like lying on beds in the evenings. Yes, and our topic then has been going forth. So although we have talked about that as pilgrims, or in a way, the pilgrim goes forth, it's not a huge part of my talk actually tonight. When I've been thinking of, especially thinking that today is Dharma Day, it's quite common on Dharma Day that you hear a talk that is about a piece of Dharma, a Dharma teaching. But tonight that's slightly different because our theme has been going forth. So it's more like what I want to say is talk about the whole arc of what you would call the Dharma life, the life where we try and apply the teachings of the Buddha. So in a sense, going forth, we could think is the time when we actually start to apply those teachings in our life to the point in which we don't need them anymore, to the point at which we embody the refuges, if you like. So it's more like I'm talking about the Dharma in its entirety. And one way in which I like to talk about that, following on from Sangharakshita, is I'm thinking of it, there's a going forth which is described as an external journey from home into homelessness, is the way that the Buddha described it for himself. And we have the example of our own teacher, Sangharakshita, burning his identity papers and dyeing his robes and then literally going forth in India. But of course, it's an inner journey. I mean, Sangharakshita often talks about going forth as being a going forth from certain views and attitudes. But he has this lovely description of the Dharma life as moving from the reactive mind to the creative mind. So I think of, the way I think about going forth is I'm going forth from my reactive mind to my creative mind. And my reactive mind is the world of greed and craving and jealousy and pride and defensiveness, and the creative mind is just a synonym for the freedom of awakening, if you like. So that's that's how I'm thinking of going forth. And what my sort of proposition, if you like, is that, how would I describe this? I think it comes back to, and this I've been thinking about this for about the last year, that it comes down to how do you maintain intensity of engagement in your Dharma life, in applying the Dharma to your life over long periods of time. Yeah, I think that's the question. So in a way, what I'm going to offer tonight is just a few ways in which I think about that myself. And it's an invitation or a prompt for you to ask that question in your life. And I think anybody who embarks on some kind of a spiritual journey, whatever it is, the Buddhist journey here and now tonight, it's a good question to ask is how do you maintain an intensity of engagement over long periods of time? So I'm going to, I've got quite a simple format. I've got probably at least a dozen ways in which I could talk about this. And I'm just going to, just in terms of offering a prompt, I'm going to talk about, I think I've got 5 or 6. So the first one is to recall going forth moments in our life, moments when we make a significant shift or a significant decision. So that's the first one. I'm going to suggest that we could do with being really clear with what we're working on right now and what's the next step we need to take. I'm going to suggest that we use a Dharma text periodically to review how we're doing. I'm going to suggest that we need to reactivate our going forth regularly. And I'm also going to suggest that there aren't any shortcuts, or else we'd all be taking them. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, yeah. And then finally, I'm going to say something about play as well. Remember to play when you're on a long journey. Remember to play. So, recalling going forth moments from your life. So now, sometimes when we think of going forth and we have this story of the Buddha, and in our tradition we have the story of Sangharakshita, we can think it's an incredibly dramatic moment in our life of in complete reorganization. And, that's the archetype. They're quite extraordinary stories. But I think it's worth recalling, whatever the moments are in your life, when you make a significant shift or you make a significant decision. So it may not be quite as dramatic as burning your passport and so on. But when I do that, I've got a couple which I'm just going to share with you that I do bring to mind periodically. I've got one to start with. One of the things I'm not going to do tonight is to talk about faith or shraddha, which is an incredibly important aspect of maintaining a Dharma life. But my relationship to faith, I know, is not matched by many other people's experience, because we talk about that quite regularly and so on. And my relationship to a faith, or my shraddha, is that probably when I decided to come along to a Buddhist center sort of properly, I'd had a couple of dabbles, which was about November 1996, and I was in the midst of a nervous breakdown at the time. Within about a month, I thought, I'm just going to sign up for life. I just sort of knew it. And, I didn't really know much about his FWBO then. And I was like, they have this thing where you can ask to become a mitra. I was like, don't know what that means, but whatever, whatever you call, your deepening path of engagement, just sign me up for it. Ask for ordination. I didn't know what that meant, but I was like, yeah, whatever you call it. So something had happened to me, and it was the people I met. It was the clarity. I remember listening to Bante's taped lectures of the Noble Eightfold Path, and I'd come from working in conflict resolution and human rights, and there was just some things that he said that just went so deep in me. I was like, this is the perspective I've been looking for all my life. So there was that. There was something else, my own response, that I just thought, I'm going to sign up for this. And my journey has been relatively straightforward in that I've very rarely experienced doubt in the context I'm in, my ability to have a go at practicing it, or the goal, even, what the goal of Buddhism is. I very rarely, I literally can remember. It's not, by the way, it's not a kind of transcendental thing, because does require conditions. I remember I lost faith, if you like, or I experienced doubt for about 4 days while I was on a solitary in New Zealand in 2019. But over the last 25 years, that is one of the very, very few times that I can ever remember not feeling this kind of Shraddha response and not living my life on it. So I don't think that I'm typical, actually, and a lot of people really, it's a part of their journey is to figure out what they believe in, who they believe in, and actually working through doubt can be incredibly important and beneficial to them. So I'm not going to say much more about faith, even though I think that there is something very important about it. What I will say is that when I moved to Padmaloka, as Vidyamala mentioned, which was March the 6th, 1999, I knew that was a significant sort of division in my life, a significant kind of choice. And I knew, it sort of went like this for me. I was like, I think it was definitely, I could either pick up my career, or I could move to this retreat centre and unfold my life in that context. And I thought to myself, I have to own the consequences of the decision. If I go to Padmaloka, there are going to be certain consequences. I knew that there would be a certain loss of worldly status. I would probably lose the ability to resume my career at a future date. I would have less financial security. And so I had to make the decision, aware of what the consequences might be. And I also thought to myself, who is it that I want to be in 20 years' time, and what's the best path for that? And so I did a kind of imaginal thing, right? And the great thing about telling this story is that I am 20 years on now, so I can kind of go, what was that like? And I'm just like, yeah, I made the right decision. I've got no doubt about that. I made the right decision. And I've got no regrets about that particular choice, which felt really significant. Anyway, maybe not much more to say about it, but I was aware of the significance of that decision. I just want to mention one other experience as well, which is after I was at Padmaloka for 12 years altogether, but after 6 years, I left, and I wanted to. It's almost like I'd been sitting at the feet of my teachers, if you like, which was basically the Padmaloka community, not just the elders, but the whole community. I'd learnt the Dharma. I felt like I'd had a really good training, but I felt like I needed to go and test that training in less supportive conditions, basically back out in the world. That's what I felt. So perhaps it wasn't absolutely necessary to do. I don't know whether I'd always recommend that, but I just thought I need to go and do that. So I left, and I literally sort of walked out I planned it and told them, and then I decided I didn't just, we watched a film about Mingyur Rinpoche, by the way, earlier in the week, where he just jumps over he throws his bag over the monastery gate and leaves in the middle of the night, not telling anyone. No, I did tell them, and furthermore, I took a backpack and I travelled around Britain for 5 months. It was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. I visited a lot of Triratna centres. I did quite a lot of walking. Sometimes I took my bike, sometimes I hitched. And I had a moment that I still remember, right? It was a very significant moment when about 2 months into that journey, I was down in Cardiff. I was seeing, where's Pramudita? I was seeing Sagaradana, and I was on my way to Devon very slowly. I think I was going to help at the Buddhafield Festival. And he said, I'll give you a lift across the Bristol Channel in my boat. So how cool is that when you're on a sort of journey like this? So on his sailing boat. So I went across and then I stayed on the boat overnight. And the next day I walked up this path up to the top of the cliff, right? And at that point there was a path. So I walked up here, and then there's a path going, along the top of the cliff. Now I had several days before I needed to be anywhere. So I literally stood on that kind of T-junction. It's a bit like that Robert Frost poem, Two Roads Diverge in a Yellow Wood, or whatever it's called. And I looked down this path. I just looked. And then I turned the other way, and I just looked. And then I turned back the other way. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'll go this way. And the freedom I felt in that moment, I was like, wow. I felt like I'd had some training, so in mindfulness and just like being aware of my sort of emotional state, and also I'd planned my journey enough so that it was a very spacious journey. And so the freedom I felt in that moment was just, I was like, that is amazing. I must cherish this moment, and I need to live my life. It won't always be like that. I've got time just to follow a path, and I don't need to change direction for several days. It won't always be like that, but the quality of mind that I felt in that moment, I needed to cherish. So, and I do, even in the midst of, being a trustee and, having to make decisions for to help build a community and so on, which is something I believe in. Even in those moments when you take on responsibility, I recall the freedom and try and live my life from that place as much as I can. Yeah, so the second, this is all under recall. It's an invitation to you as well. I've just told you a couple of stories, but it's an invitation to you all to recall the going forth moments in your life. The second point here is be clear about what you're working on right now and what is the next step you need to take. And this is a point that very much came out of my order convening work, meeting order members around the world. And I used to visit a lot of chapters. And I remember it's actually reading one of Subhuti's books, Mind in Harmony. And Subhuti used to be an order convener. And he says one of the reasons why he wrote that book, which is about being really clear about mind and mental events, is that when he had been order convener, he said he had almost a universal experience of meeting order members who were really genuinely trying to apply the Dharma in their lives, doing good work, taking responsibility for themselves, nevertheless weren't that clear about what they were working on right now and what was the next step they needed to take. It's almost like he felt perhaps we were creating a very beautiful community of generalists, and he thought a little bit more focus was a good thing. So, and I think he was right. I think I met something a bit similar, and I think I'm like that. I think I actually could do. So I have tried to take this on a little bit and make sure that there is a clear kind of dharmic theme that is alive in my life as much as I can. There's also, when I was researching the kind of, how we have chapters and going for refuge groups in our community, there's a very, very lovely discussion in the Door of Liberation seminar, one of Sangharakshita's very early seminars in 1974, where he says in the tradition, you get what's called the precepts of the Lama. So this is in the Tibetan tradition. And he said where this comes from is that the Buddhist tradition arises because the Buddha gives very specific teachings to specific people in a specific context, and they become general Buddhism. So they're almost like they're taken from their context and place, and they become general teachings like Metta or the Satipatthana Sutta or something. And then the job of the Lama is to take that general teaching and then make it into specific precepts for their disciples. And Sangharakshita said chapters are in some sense the equivalent of the precepts of the Lama. So they're the places, and any small group context in our community, I would say, could work like this, where we take the general Dharma and we with the help of our friends, we work out what it is we're working on and how to apply it in our lives. We review it and so on. Chapters don't always work like that, but when they do, they work well. I think it's an undervalued aspect of chapters and going for refuge groups in our community. The third, what am I calling these points? Use a Dhamma text to review and reflect how you are doing. Because the Buddha did give some texts which he said, do this again and again. So one of the most famous is the Dasadhamma Sutta, the 10 things for someone who has gone forth to reflect on regularly. And it's a very good text. I go through it. Thing is with me, I'm not very consistent, so I might do it one time, and then I might do it 3 months later, and then I might do it 4 years after that. So, I'm not that consistent, but nevertheless, I use this text. I've probably gone back to it a dozen times over the years. And it's like a checklist in a way. So I won't go through them all for you, but I'm just saying it's good to find a Dhamma text that you can use just to sort of review how you're doing. I'll just give you a flavour of the 10 by giving you 3 of them. And by the way, Ratnaghosh has done a very good rendering of this that's applicable to our community. Specifically for order members, but anyone in our community could use it. So number 3, my behaviour should be different from that of householders. A person gone forth should often reflect on this. Now, householders, that doesn't mean, because a lot of us are householders, so it doesn't, it's what it means is, if you've gone forth, you've taken on certain Buddhist precepts, so they should be, your behaviour should be different from people who aren't taking on those precepts. Yeah, and I have to say, sometimes my behaviour isn't good enough. It's a sobering thing to reflect on, actually, that sometimes I feel, no, I am no better. I remember a time when I was rushing to catch a plane running through an airport, and I dropped my passport, the most important document that one carries when you're travelling internationally, and I didn't notice. And somebody went, "Hi, look, you've dropped your passport," as of, "You idiot, you've just dropped the most important document." And in that moment, my first thought, I'm embarrassed to say, was, thank goodness, I was going to swear then, thank goodness I'm not wearing robes. Imagine how stupid I would have looked if I was like a monk. But of course, I'm trying to be like a monk. I'm trying to practice Buddhist precepts. And, there I am flapping around in an airport, dropping my passport and so on. So I was like, okay, yeah, my behaviour needs to be better than that. Number 8, what am I becoming as the days and nights fly past? That's a good one too. Keep in mind, what am I becoming as the days and nights fly past? A person gone forth should often reflect on this. Now, of course, that would have been relevant throughout the entire history of the Buddhist tradition, but I think it's especially relevant in these days when the means of distraction have been virtually perfected by modern technology and internet and so on. The means of distraction have been virtually perfected. So, it's what you have to do is distinguish between spending time not doing very much when you're actually aware of yourself, and spending time when you're just distracted and avoiding being aware of yourself. Yeah, because sometimes they can look a little bit similar, but they're quite different. Yeah, so it's a good distinction to learn, I think, in one's behaviour. And then number 10, I'll give Ratnaghosh's translation here. Am I aware of the fruits of my spiritual practice? Could I say that I have become more aware, kind, confident, wise, positive, compassionate, and free? For example. And I think, in a way, this is a very interesting one, because I didn't specifically put down a thing here of like, how do you calibrate or measure success in the Dharma life? It's it's not difficult, and B, it's a source of tension and in many spiritual communities, including ours, about whether about making claims to insight and so on. And this was an issue that really vexed me while I was order convener. And it's there's a bit of a tension line that runs through our order around this. And I've come to think that in my practice, it's more helpful to think that I already have a sort of understanding, even I would say visionary experience, even I could say some insight, and my work is to integrate it. And I've come to see that I think the Dharma life is predominantly about integration. And obviously, any insight and insight practices that you do can be enormously confidence giving. And it's not like by saying that integration is in my view, the predominant thing, I'm saying something against anybody who pursues a pure kind of insight path. But I haven't met anyone yet who isn't still trying to integrate stuff. And, and I think that the way that Sangharakshita described having a visionary experience and then transforming or integrating the rest of your life in line with that experience is a very, very good way of having some understanding of what it is we're trying to do. I think I'll just move on because time passes. So reactivate your going forth regularly. So I think the primary thing I would say here is just to go on retreats regularly. So I think that when you go on a retreat, it is a going forth. And even I would say, although there are some traditions, like some of the Tibetan traditions where they emphasize and encourage 3-year retreats, actually, I think a model of going on retreats regularly is very strong. It builds a lot of robustness and a lot of integration because you're having to make transitions from your worldly life, whatever it is, into retreat life and back again. And I think it's a very, very strong practice. And I think generally we're pretty good at it, actually. I think we all have a good training in that. What I would say, right, in my experience, if you can organise your life, I would suggest or recommend that you try and go on at least a week's retreat every 3 or 4 months. Yeah, so I know that's not possible, especially for some people, especially if you've got kids, school-age kids. But I would say that that would be a good aspiration to have. I mean, I would say even ideally, 1 week a month would be really good, but not very many people have the capacity, resources, or lifestyle that's possible. But I would say, do something where you're making this transition between your retreat life and whatever your ordinary life is as regularly as you can. And if you can't do a week, do a weekend, obviously. And I remember talking to Padmavajra. Of course, he's seen thousands of people come through Padmaloka over the years, and he said that when people drift away from the Dharma life, or let's say spiritual life in general, the number one thing that he has discovered in talking to them is that they stopped going on retreat. They just stopped going. They forgot, didn't like it, I don't know, whatever, but they stopped going on retreats. Yeah, I was going to mention pilgrimages here as well, because going on pilgrimage is, of course, another archetypal way of going forth, and like a retreat as well. And certainly, I've done some walks when my knees were better. I've done some walks which they weren't pilgrimages in the sense of having a sacred destination. They were more like the walk itself was like the retreat. But I think going on a pilgrimage is a very, a wonderful thing to do. Yes, so number 5 was there probably aren't shortcuts, or else we'd all be taking them. Yeah, I mean, I'm still, I've uncovered some sort of layers of, I simply call it samskaras, these kind of bundles of habituated responses. It's like a defense mechanism of how how I've learned to protect and survive. And I'm still uncovering these now. It's like 30 years almost into the Dharma life. And, so when that happens, I don't think, oh my God, what have I been doing the last 30 years? I think that probably means I'm now integrated enough to actually look at some of the really deep layers. Yeah, and funnily enough, reading some of the neuroscience around that is exactly what happens. That's exactly, is how that is borne out in that research. So that's how the mind works. So, I obviously you try and sort of keep a dial of intensity up in your life, but I think it is a long-term project. I've talked to people who are really inspiring, who have tried to go a really kind of Vipassana shortcut thing, but either they've said to me themselves, or it's my opinion watching them, there's a lot of integration that needs to be done. And I think that's why I talk about integration so much. And I think that, we just have very deep mechanisms for our own protection and survival. And it does take quite a lot of gentle, persistent effort to integrate those into our sort of, into our a stable awareness. It just takes quite a long time. I can see it's good to sort of remember bits of yourself that no longer conflict you. Yeah, it's good to recall that, and I can do that in my life. There are certain things which used to really angst me and confuse me, and they just no longer do. At the same time, here I am in my mid-50s, still working. I've said this to several people, but I could be having conversations with Sangamani, who so many of you know I was living with in Ipswich, and like that, I'm 4 years old. It's just like instantly, it's so quick, like trying to find the amount of awareness you need. What I will say now is that my re-regulation time has gone down from, say, a week to a few minutes, under good conditions. So, my re-regulation time is improving. So how the hell do you get it down to zero? Oof. That's the job, that's the work. Yeah. And then finally, I just wanted to sort of say, remember to play, because I think when you're embarking on a project that is going to take quite a long time, and it requires a particular attitude to effort as well. And I think it's important to play. And I think for two reasons, right? Just because play is good and just that it releases energy, and you just need to learn what kind of play. I don't mean what kind of sport, but I mean what kind of attitude towards play. And I think this is a really important point about the Dharma life in general. And this is why it's not so easy, because the type of effort that it is required is not the same type of effort that you use when you have a particular material goal, like you want to run a marathon in 3 hours, let's say. Like the type of effort that's required in the Dharma life, it's why Bhante talks about the spiral path is because it's augmentative. And what that means is that you try and develop a particular attitude, a particular type of awareness, a particular quality, not so that you can get a higher one, but just that, and then the next one arises out of it naturally. Yeah, so it's just the spiral path teaching. So it's very important to. It's quite hard to understand, but it's also an extremely important principle to the type of. It does require effort in the Dharma life, but it's a different type of effort. It's a type of effort where you're not trying to grasp after the goal. It's a type of effort which requires discipline, where you're developing a certain quality or set of qualities, and the next quality or set of qualities will therefore naturally arise out of them, and you need to trust that process. Yeah, so I think that's really an important point. And I think that learning to play well can really help in that process, as well as just being a good thing to do to sustain a life in the Dharma, because play has this sense of spontaneity, and you just need to learn which kind of play you're doing, because if you're just grasping after a particular result, it's going to bring you suffering. If there's a particular type of aesthetic quality to play, which you can trust that is the play of the spiral rather than the play of the wheel of life. And perhaps at the simplest way of putting that, learn to enjoy what you do, because when you don't enjoy what you do, you stop doing it, but basically, don't you? So, maybe that can just be the final word this evening, find ways of enjoying what you do, find ways of enjoyment that doesn't involve a kind of grasping, and that will sustain you. That will sustain you a very long way. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.